Well, hello, Internet land. My name is Father Andrew Costa. I'm the church planting pastor or the church planting vicar here at the Dark County Anglican Church. And it was brought to my attention that some questions had been coming up on some of our other social media feeds that I thought were good questions and I thought they were worth addressing. So I just wanted to take a few minutes and talk about a couple of them. One of the questions was, in the Reformed Episcopal Church, what are we reforming from? That's a really good question. There are a couple ways to throw around this word reformed when you're talking about European Christianity. So it's a bit of a flexible word. Probably the most broad way to talk about reform in European Christianity is that in the 1500s, folks were coming out of the Catholic Church, the Roman Catholic Church, wanting to reform certain aspects of it. But we're finding that the church was rejecting their attempts at it. And so these early leaders, among them Martin Luther, Zwingli, Calvin, in our tradition, Thomas Cranmer is a reformer. These reformers, of course, were rejected by the church, some of them even to the point of being executed by the church in our tradition, Thomas Cranmer. And from them, you see these reform movements: Lutheranism, the Reformed Church in Switzerland, Church of England, Presbyterianism up in Scotland. So to say that you're a Reformed church will almost always mean that you are in some way connecting yourself to the reformers of the 1500s. And some of their reforms included things like salvation coming by grace alone, through faith alone, as witnessed to in Scripture alone, and not Scripture all by itself. Of course, we look to tradition and the church history. So we say Scripture alone, we're talking about Scripture being the highest authority of how to connect to God through grace alone, by faith alone. So that is one way to think about Reformed. Another way to think about Reformed is the Reformed Church in Switzerland, which was the movement that John Calvin initiates. That's a very specific flavor of Reformed thinking. And there's some things in there about does man have free will, or what role does God have to play in setting a man free to be saved? Does God predestine that work, or is that something man chooses? And so, of course, John Calvin's Reform movement believed that God predestines that work. So fast forward, you have the Reformed Episcopal Church. And when the Reformed Episcopal Church first came into being, they were embracing many of these things of the Reform movement because they were already part of a Protestant family of churches. The Protestant Episcopal Church in America, which is now the Episcopal Church, they were part of the Protestant family of churches, and the Reformed Episcopal Church reformed even further away from them. And why is that? Well, as the Reformed Episcopal Church is evaluating what's going on in the Episcopal Church at this time, they're seeing two trends that brought some concern. The first one was that the Episcopal Church was becoming very exclusionary and saying, like, you could only take communion if you had experienced the grace of God through very specifically Episcopalian events. And that exclusivism meant that when Protestants tried to work together in the United States, the priests that were trying to do so were often admonished by their bishops for doing so. And so our bishop, Bishop Cummins, saw this and saw, no, the Protestant family of churches could really do some great things if they work together moving forward. And so for one of the reasons that the Reformed Episcopal Church came into being was this radical ecumenism of the time, that churches should work together. On the other side of the clergy that were in the Episcopal Church, there was a growing blind eye being turned towards certain fringe beliefs that pulled people further and further away from Scripture. It was a proto-liberalism within the church that Bishop Cummins saw and found very concerning. And so when he saw these two movements and thought, that the Episcopal Church does not want to reform away from what it's becoming, he, working together with some other like-minded Protestants, came away from the Episcopal Church and started what's called the Reformed Episcopal Church. And so the Reformed Episcopal Church was A, part of the Reform movement of the 1500s, and B, reforming away from the Protestant Episcopal Church that is now the Episcopal Church. And that's just happening 150 years ago. Well, here we are today, the Reformed Episcopal Church, 150 years old. We still embrace that word reform. So what do we mean by that? Well, I mean, we still see ourselves as in that tradition of the Reformed Church, that Jesus Christ saved us by grace alone, through faith alone, and that we're connected to that. And many clergymen like myself would even look to the more specifically Reformed movements that come out of Germany, that come out of Switzerland, and say, man, my theology is connected to what those folks are doing. That's not true of all Reformed Episcopal clergy, but it is true about this one who's talking to you right now. So what are we reforming from? We're reforming from broken theological systems out of the 1500s, and then theological sliding that's taking place in the 1800s. And reforming the church is always a healthy instinct. There have been reform movements throughout the church, throughout history. Actually, Martin Luther was quite surprised. He thought the church was due for reform, that when he brought his reforms forward, the church would embrace them, because there have been seasons of reform in the church. And he was quite shocked to find that the church all of a sudden was allergic to being reformed from within. That's not necessarily our take. We see the need that there are seasons that the church needs to be reformed, and that's a healthy instinct. See a book by John Calvin, The Need to Reform the Church, if you want to read further. Well, I hope that helps answer your question. As we exist today, the Reformed Episcopal Church, we are a Protestant family of Christians. Our structures are very formal, right? So if you walk into one of our churches, you might be like, this looks like a pre-Reformed church. Well, some of the way we do church might look quite ancient, coming from before the time of the Reformation. But the things we believe are in line with the beliefs of our brothers and sisters in the 1500s who fought and even died for those ancient beliefs, and we're so glad for them. Well, I hope this helps answer some of the questions you're asking. If you have follow-up questions on this specific topic, please let me know. It'd be my joy to try and answer some of those. So long.